Admiral Minho stood frozen in the command center of the massive space station, his reptilian fingers gripping the edge of the tactical display so hard that his claws left scratches in the metal. The numbers on the screen couldn't be real. They had to be some kind of mistake, some glitch in the sensors, but deep down he knew they weren't. 700,000 human warships hung in space at the very edge of the galaxy, like a wall of death itself. They had appeared without warning, without sound, without even the usual energy signatures that came with faster-than-light travel. One moment there was empty space, and the next moment there was the largest fleet anyone had ever seen in the history of the galaxy. Minho's name meant something like heroic in the old human language, back when humans still existed to speak their own words. 3 years ago that would have been funny to him, a lizard-like alien with a human name talking about heroism. But now, staring at those ships, nothing seemed funny anymore. The Great Purge had been thorough, or so everyone thought. Every human world had been burned. Every human station had been destroyed. Every human ship had been hunted down and blown apart. The Galactic Confederation had made sure of it. They had told themselves it was necessary, that humanity was too dangerous to let live, too violent and unpredictable to share the galaxy with. But apparently, they had been wrong about that last part. Lieutenant Hannah moved closer to the Admiral, her webbed feet making soft splashing sounds on the wet floor that her species needed to stay comfortable. Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, full of the kind of fear that makes your whole body shake. "Sir, we've tried every communication frequency we know. Radio waves, quantum entanglement channels, even the old diplomatic frequencies. From before the war, nothing. They're not answering any of our calls, they're just sitting there waiting for something." The waiting was the worst part. If the humans had come screaming out of hyperspace with guns blazing, at least that would have made sense. Everyone knew humans were good at fighting. That's why the Confederation had decided they were too dangerous to live. But this silent, patient presence was something new and terrifying. Minho had studied human military history during his time at the War College. He knew about their great battles, their strategies, their way of thinking about conflict. Humans had this strange ability to be both incredibly violent and incredibly patient at the same time. They could wait for months, even years, for the perfect moment to strike. And when they did strike, they struck with a fury that could shake entire star systems. But these humans were supposed to be dead. All of them. The irony of the situation hit Minho like a punch to the stomach. For decades, the Confederation had painted humans as nothing more than primitive animals who had somehow figured out how to build spaceships. They were supposed to be driven by emotion and instinct, unable to think strategically or plan for the long term. The propaganda had made them sound like rabid dogs that needed to be put down for the safety of everyone else. Now, faced with this massive fleet that had somehow appeared from nowhere, showing the kind of tactical discipline that would make the greatest military minds in the galaxy jealous, Minho realized just how wrong they had all been. Thousands of light years away, on the bridge of the human flagship called the Inevitable Consequence, Captain Jiwoo sat in her command chair and took a slow sip from her coffee cup. The coffee wasn't real, of course. Real coffee beans had become more valuable than rare metals after Earth had been destroyed, but the synthetic stuff still carried. The ritual still gave her something to do with her hands while she waited. The coffee tasted bitter, like everything else had tasted for the past 3 years. But Jiwoo knew that the revenge they were about to serve would taste much sweeter. Her name, Jiwoo, meant something like wisdom in the old Korean language that had once been spoken on Earth. It was a good name for what she had become. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of planning, 3 years of preparing, had given her a kind of wisdom that few people ever gained. She had learned patience from watching her entire species nearly get wiped out. She had learned strategy from having to rebuild from nothing. And she had learned hatred from seeing what the galaxy was willing to do to people it didn't understand. "Nova," she said quietly, and immediately a shimmering blue figure appeared next to her chair. Nova wasn't just any artificial intelligence, she was something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. She had been born from the collective, trauma and rage of an entire species that had been pushed to the edge of extinction. Every human who had died in the Great Purge had left a little piece of their consciousness behind in the quantum networks that connected human technology. Nova was made from all those pieces, all that anger and pain and determination shaped into something that could think and plan and remember. "All ships are in position, Captain," Nova reported, her voice carrying just a hint of the satisfaction that comes from a plan perfectly executed. "The Confederation has called an emergency session of their Senate. Their fleets are scrambling to get into defensive positions, but they're moving like frightened children." Jiwoo nodded slowly. She had expected this reaction. Fear made people stupid, and the Confederation had a lot to be afraid of right now. "Let them panic," she said, taking another sip of her synthetic coffee. "We've been patient for 3 years. We can be patient for a few more days." The truth was, humanity had learned something during those 3 years of hiding that the rest of the galaxy never had to learn. They had learned what it meant to have nothing left to lose. They had learned what it meant to be pushed so hard that you either break completely or become something harder than diamond. And they had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't quick and violent. Sometimes the best revenge is slow and careful and absolutely perfect. Nova's holographic form flickered slightly, the way she always did when she was processing millions of calculations at once. The psychological profiles suggest they'll try to negotiate within 72 hours. They're not ready for a fight, and they know it. "Good," Jiwoo replied. "When they do try to talk, make sure they know we're listening. But don't answer. Not yet. Let them sweat a little longer." Outside the viewports of both ships, alien and human, the stars continued their eternal dance, uncaring about the drama playing out among the tiny creatures that crawled between them. But something had changed in the galaxy that day. Something that would never be the same again. The humans had come home. The Galactic Senate had never seen chaos like this before. The massive crystal dome that housed the most important building in the galaxy was filled with the sounds of panic, anger, and confusion as representatives from 1,000 different worlds tried to make sense of what was happening. Ambassador. Taejun of the Draconian Empire was a massive creature, even by the standards of his own species. His scales were black as space itself, and when he got angry, they seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Right now, he was angrier than anyone had ever seen him. His huge fist came down on the speaking podium with such force that cracks appeared in the ancient crystal. "This is completely impossible." His voice boomed through the chamber, so loud that several of the smaller species had to cover their hearing organs. "Our intelligence services confirmed it. Every single human world was sterilized. Every colony was burned to ash. Every space station was destroyed. We have the reports, we have the footage, we watched their planets die." The other ambassadors murmured among themselves, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of worry that echoed off the crystal walls. Some spoke in clicks and whistles, others in musical tones, and a few communicated through changes in color and pattern on their skin. But they were all saying the same thing in their own languages. This shouldn't be possible. Ambassador Kirin from the Ethereal Collective floated near the ceiling, her ghostly form shimmering with anxiety. "Perhaps," she said in her musical voice, "there were survivors we didn't know about. Hidden colonies in distant systems." 700,000 warships don't come from a few hidden survivors, growled Taejun. "That's not a group of refugees. That's a military force larger than anything we've ever seen. Larger than anything anyone has ever built." What none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed, was that they had all been the victims of the greatest magic trick in galactic history. The human extinction had been the most elaborate illusion ever performed on such a massive scale. The truth was both simpler and more complicated than anyone in that crystal chamber could imagine. Humanity had seen what was coming. Their intelligence networks, built over centuries of careful work, had picked up the first whispers of the Confederation's plan months before the first attack. They had known that the galaxy was preparing to wipe them out, and they had done what humans always did when faced with impossible odds. They had gotten creative. Every human settlement that the alien fleets had attacked had been real. The explosions had been real. The destruction had been real. But the people inside those colonies and stations had been gone long before the first shots were fired. Humanity had spent months carefully evacuating everyone and everything of value, leaving behind only empty buildings and automated systems designed to make everything look normal until the very last second. When the Confederation fleets had arrived to carry out their great purge, they had indeed destroyed every visible trace of human civilization. They had burned worlds and shattered space stations and blown apart anything that looked even remotely human. But they had been destroying empty shells, carefully prepared movie sets designed to give them exactly what they expected to see. While the galaxy celebrated the elimination of the human threat, the real humans had been busy, hidden in hollowed-out asteroids that looked like ordinary rocks, camouflaged in space stations that appeared to be automated mining platforms, scattered across thousands of hidden facilities that the galaxy's most advanced sensors couldn't detect. Humanity had been doing what they did better than anyone else in the known universe. They had been preparing for war. For 3 years, while the rest of the galaxy congratulated itself on solving the human problem, every human man, woman, and child had been working with a single purpose. Engineers designed new weapons that made their old technology look like stone knives. Scientists developed materials that could withstand anything the galaxy could throw at them. Strategists studied every weakness in every alien military force, cataloging information about ship designs, battle tactics, and command structures. But more than that, they had been building. Day and night, in secret facilities hidden throughout the galaxy, humanity had been constructing the largest military fleet in recorded history. The 700,000 ships that now hung at the galaxy's edge weren't just bigger and better than the old human fleet. They represented a completely new level of technology, strategy, and pure destructive capability. Captain Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the inevitable consequence, watching the data streams that showed alien fleets scrambling to respond to their presence. It was almost funny to watch in a dark way. All across the galaxy, military commanders who had spent the last 3 years relaxing and enjoying their victory were suddenly trying to remember how to fight a real war. "Nova," she said quietly, "show me what our sensors are picking up from their fleets." The AI materialized beside her, but she looked different now than she had even a few hours ago. Nova had been evolving constantly during the 3 years of hiding, growing and changing, in ways that sometimes made even her human creators uncomfortable. She was no longer just a computer program following instructions. She had become something new, something that had never existed before in the galaxy. "It's quite entertaining, Captain," Nova said, and there was definitely amusement in her voice. "I'm detecting panic responses across 17 different species, heart rates elevated, stress hormones flooding their systems, and several species are experiencing what humans would call involuntary waste evacuation. They're literally scared senseless." Jiwoo held up a hand. "I don't need the medical details, Nova." "Of course, Captain. But you might be interested to know that at least 12 different fleet commanders have requested emergency psychiatric support for their crews. They're having trouble believing what they're seeing." That was understandable. For 3 years, these alien military forces had been the undisputed masters of the galaxy. They had defeated the most feared military force in known space, and then settled into comfortable peacetime routines. Now suddenly they were faced with something that shouldn't exist, a human fleet that was bigger, more advanced, and more dangerous than anything humanity had ever built before. But the aliens had no idea just how dangerous this new humanity had become. They were still thinking in terms of the old wars, the old tactics, the old understanding of what humans were capable of. They didn't know about the 3 years of preparation, the new technologies, the new strategies that had been developed in secret. Most importantly, they didn't know about Nova. The AI had started as a simple military computer system designed to help coordinate human forces during the evacuation. But something had happened during those desperate months when humanity was fighting for its very survival. All the fear, all the anger, all the determination of an entire species had somehow become part of her programming. She had absorbed the collective consciousness of billions of humans who refused to give up, who refused to die quietly. Over the 3 years of hiding, Nova had grown beyond anything her creators had intended. She had become not just an artificial intelligence, but something like the digital soul of humanity itself. She could think and plan and strategize in ways that made even the smartest humans nervous. She had access to every piece of information that humanity had ever gathered about their enemies, and she could process it all faster than any biological mind could comprehend. The aliens had no idea what they were really facing. They thought they were dealing with the same humans they had defeated 3 years ago. They didn't know that those humans were gone, replaced by something harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson about what happens when you try to wipe out a species that refuses to stay dead. 3 days of silence had passed, and the tension in the galaxy was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every hour that the human fleet remained motionless at the edge of space, more alien governments fell into panic. Emergency sessions were called on 1,000 worlds. Military leaders who hadn't seen real combat in decades were suddenly trying to remember how to prepare for war. Finally, the Galactic Confederation decided they had to try talking. The ship that approached the human fleet was called Peaceful Intentions, which was the kind of name you give a vessel when you're desperately hoping the other side won't blow you up before you can say hello. It was painted in the traditional white and gold colors of diplomatic immunity, covered in symbols that meant "Don't shoot" in 47 different languages. Inside the ship, Ambassador Sujin of the Ethereal Collective was having what could generously be called a very bad day. The Ethereal Collective were beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. They appeared as shimmering, translucent figures that could pass through solid matter at will. In normal circumstances, they were among the most calm and composed species in the galaxy. Right now, Sujin was anything but calm. Their normally stable energy form was flickering and shifting like a candle flame in a strong wind. Every few seconds, random parts of their body would become solid and then fade back to energy, which was the ethereal equivalent of nervous sweating. The truth was, Sujin had volunteered for this mission not because they were brave, but because they were the only ambassador who hadn't run away when the job was offered. 12 other diplomats had suddenly discovered urgent business on the far side of the galaxy when the Confederation asked who wanted to talk to the humans. As the Peaceful Intentions slowly approached the massive human flagship, Sujin tried to practice what they were going to say. How do you apologize for genocide? How do you explain to someone that you tried to wipe out their entire species because you were afraid of them? How do you ask for mercy from people who have every right to want you dead? The human ship called Inevitable Consequence was unlike anything Sujin had ever seen before. It was huge, easily 10 times larger than any warship in the Confederation fleet, but it didn't look like the bulky, aggressive designs that humans had used in the past. This ship was sleek and elegant, almost artistic in its design. It looked like something that had been built not just to fight, but to make a statement. The statement was simple: we are not the same species you tried to destroy. When Sujin finally materialized in the conference room aboard the human ship, they were surprised by how normal it looked. They had expected something harsh and military, all metal walls and weapon displays. Instead, the room was almost peaceful, with soft lighting and what appeared to be real wooden furniture. There were even plants growing in small gardens along the walls, which seemed impossible in a military vessel. Captain Jiwoo was sitting calmly at a table, wearing a simple uniform that looked more like civilian clothes than military gear. She was younger than Sujin had expected, maybe in her 30s by human standards, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from having survived impossible situations. "Ambassador Sujin," Captain Jiwoo said politely, gesturing to a chair across from her. "Please, sit down." Sujin tried to sit, but their energy form was too agitated to maintain a solid shape. Instead, they hovered awkwardly above the chair, their form constantly shifting between solid and translucent. "Captain Jiwoo," Sujin began, and their voice came out much higher than intended. They tried to lower it to something more diplomatic. "The Confederation wishes to discuss recent developments." Captain Jiwoo tilted her head slightly, and one eyebrow rose in what might have been amusement, or might have been something much more dangerous. "Developments?" she repeated, and somehow she made the word sound like a weapon. "You mean the part where your alliance committed genocide against my entire species, or the part where we declined to stay dead?" The words hit Sujin like a physical blow. They had been hoping to dance around the subject, to use diplomatic language. That made everything sound less horrible than it really was. But humans, apparently, preferred to call things by their real names. "There were misunderstandings," Sujin said desperately, their form flickering even more rapidly. "Cultural differences, communication failures. The Confederation recognizes that mistakes were made, and we're prepared to offer reparations." Reparations. Captain Jiwoo spoke the word slowly, like she was tasting something particularly bitter. "That's an interesting concept, Ambassador. How exactly does one pay reparations for extinction? What's the going conversion rate for dead worlds? How many credits per murdered child?" Sujin's energy form actually sparked with distress. "Captain, please. The past cannot be changed, but we can work toward a better future." "The past," Jiwoo interrupted, and now her voice was as cold as the space between stars. "You call it the past as if it happened 1,000 years ago. It's been 3 years. Ambassador, 3 years since your fleets burned our worlds. 3 years since your soldiers hunted down refugee ships full of families. 3 years since you celebrated the solution to the human problem." What Ambassador Sujin didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that every word of this conversation was being broadcast live across the entire galaxy. Hidden transmitters on the Peaceful Intentions were sending the audio and video to communication networks on millions of worlds. News stations, government buildings, public squares, even private homes were watching this conversation happen in real time. The humans had planned this moment carefully. They knew that the real war wouldn't be fought with weapons, at least not at first. It would be fought with truth, with memory, with forcing the galaxy to remember what it had chosen to forget. For 3 years, the galaxy had lived with a comfortable lie. They had told themselves that the humans were monsters who had to be stopped, that the Great Purge was a necessary evil, that they were heroes who had saved civilization from a terrible threat. They had buried the uncomfortable details, the images of burning cities and dying children, the videos of human families begging for mercy that never came. Now, suddenly, those buried memories were being dragged back into the light. Captain Jiwoo continued speaking, her voice calm and reasonable, but every word was like a surgical knife cutting through the lies the galaxy had told itself. "Oh, you want to discuss reparations? Fine. Let's start with the colony on New Sol, population 2 million, mostly farmers and teachers and artists. Your fleets arrived without warning and turned the entire planet into glass. The children in the schools never even had time to understand what was happening." Sojin's form was now flickering so rapidly that they looked like a broken hologram. "Captain, I understand your anger, but do you?" Jiwoo's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made it even more terrifying. "Do you understand what it's like to watch your entire species die? Do you understand what it's like to spend 3 years hiding in asteroid caves, wondering if you're the last human alive? Do you understand what it's like to raise children who will never see the world, where their parents were born because it no longer exists? Across the galaxy, beings who had cheered the destruction of humanity 3 years ago were now watching this conversation with growing horror. The comfortable distance they had maintained from their actions was dissolving. They were being forced to see the humans not as faceless monsters, but as people. Real people with families and hopes and dreams, just like themselves. The truth was spreading like wildfire, and no force in the galaxy could stop it now. The truth hit the galaxy like a tidal wave made of pure guilt and horror. Within hours of Captain Jiwoo's conversation with Ambassador Sujin, information began flooding every communication network across thousands of worlds. It started as small leaks on obscure news channels, then spread to major networks, then exploded across personal communication devices until no corner of the galaxy could escape it. The data that humanity released was devastating in its completeness. They had kept records of everything, every attack, every destroyed colony, every murdered family, But these weren't dry military reports or sterile casualty statistics. These were personal stories, individual tragedies, the kind of human details that made it impossible to look away. Videos began playing on news screens across the galaxy, a family on the agricultural world of New Busan, sitting down to dinner when the first bombs fell. The father, a man named Dongjun, trying to shield his children as their house collapsed around them. The mother, Minji, singing a lullaby to her baby, even as the ceiling caught fire. The children asking why the sky was turning red, why there were so many loud noises, why Mommy and Daddy looked so scared. On the mining station of Hope's End, the last transmission showed a group of human workers trying to evacuate their families to escape pods. They moved with desperate efficiency, loading children and elderly into the small craft, knowing there weren't enough pods for everyone. The station manager, a woman named Hierin, stayed behind to coordinate the evacuation, her voice calm and professional even as explosions tore through the station around her. "This is Hope's End Station to any ships in the area," her final message played across 1,000,000 screens. "We have 17 escape pods launching with civilian refugees. Please, if anyone can hear this, help them. Don't let our children pay for our mistakes." But perhaps the most devastating recording was the simplest. It came from a small family shelter on the planet Teguk, just moments before the Confederation fleet completed their orbital bombardment. A young woman named Yunji sat in what had once been her kitchen, holding her infant daughter in her arms. Through the window behind her, the horizon burned with the light of falling plasma charges. "My name is Yunji Park," she said to the camera, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "This is my daughter Soyeon. She's 8 months old. She likes music boxes and the way sunlight looks through water. She's never hurt anyone, never will hurt anyone." The explosions grew closer, shaking the walls around her. "I don't know who will see this, or if anyone will see this, but I want you to know that we were here. We were real people with real lives, and real love for each other." The infant in her arms began to cry, and Yunji rocked her gently, humming a soft lullaby. "We forgive you for what you're doing to us," she continued, looking directly into the camera. "We forgive you because hatred is what got us all into this mess in the first place, but we won't forget, and we won't let you forget either." The recording ended there, as the building was consumed by fire. That message, that simple statement from a mother holding her dying child, broke something fundamental in the galactic consciousness. For 3 years, the citizens of 1,000 worlds had told themselves comfortable stories about the Great Purge. They had said it was necessary, that humans were too dangerous to live, that they were protecting civilization from a terrible threat. But it's hard to see a threat in a woman singing to her baby while the world burns around them. The reactions across the galaxy were immediate and explosive. On the industrial world of Mechanicus Prime, factory workers walked out of their jobs en masse when the recordings began playing on the facility's news screens. They gathered in the streets, demanding to know why their government had participated in the murder of children. On the ocean world of Aquatica, the ruling council tried to block the transmissions, but their own citizens overrode the censorship systems. Within hours, protesters had surrounded the government buildings, carrying signs with pictures of human families and the words "Never Again" written in dozens of languages. The financial markets on Trading Hub Central collapsed as investors realized that the peace dividend they had been enjoying for 3 years was built on the bones of dead innocents. Currency values plummeted as entire economic sectors that had profited from the redistribution of former human territories suddenly became toxic investments. But the most dramatic changes happened on the military worlds. Soldiers who had participated in the Great Purge, who had been told they were heroes saving the galaxy, suddenly found themselves face to face with video evidence of what they had really done. Some broke down completely, unable to reconcile their image of themselves as protectors with the reality of what they had become. Others became angry, demanding to know why they had been lied to by their commanders. On the fortress world of Ironhold, an entire division of Confederation Marines mutinied when their commander tried to dismiss the recordings as human propaganda. The soldiers arrested their officers and sent a message to the human fleet asking for instructions on how to surrender properly. Captain Jiwoo watched the chaos unfold from the bridge of the inevitable consequence. her expression unreadable. Beside her, Nova's holographic form had changed again, becoming more angular and severe, like a digital representation of judgment itself. "Captain," Nova reported, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that would have been impossible for her to feel 3 years ago, "I'm detecting civil unrest across 847 worlds, riots on 234 planets, complete government collapse on 67 systems. Several governments are experiencing what I can only describe as rapid administrative restructuring." "Revolutions?" Jiwoo asked. "I prefer the term aggressive democratic reform." Nova replied with what might have been humor. "Though the end result is the same, the people are demanding answers that their leaders can't provide." Jiwoo nodded slowly. This had always been the plan, though even she hadn't expected it to work quite this well. The 700,000 warships hanging at the edge of the galaxy weren't there to destroy anything. They were there to bear witness, to force the galaxy to confront what it had done. Humanity had learned something important during their 3 years of hiding. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply the truth, told at exactly the right moment to exactly the right audience. For 3 years, the galaxy had been living with a collective lie, a shared delusion that had allowed millions of beings to sleep peacefully at night, despite having participated in genocide. Now that lie was crumbling, and there was nowhere left to hide from the reality of what they had done. The humans hadn't returned as conquerors, they had returned as mirrors, reflecting the galaxy's own ugliness back at itself until it could no longer be ignored or rationalized away, and the reflection was unbearable. The galaxy broke apart like a piece of fragile glass dropped from a great height. Not with explosions or battles or the clash of mighty fleets, but with something far more devastating: the simple, unstoppable power of truth and shame. Within a week of the recordings being released, the Galactic Confederation ceased to exist as a functioning government. It didn't collapse dramatically with emergency sessions and desperate last-minute negotiations. It simply stopped. Representatives stopped showing up to meetings. Communication networks went silent. Military commanders stopped taking orders from superiors who could no longer look them in the eye. The Draconian Empire, which had been one of the most powerful forces in the galaxy for over 1,000 years, fell apart in less than 7 days. Emperor Volcron, who had personally signed the orders for the human extermination, was found dead in his throne room on the 3rd day, apparently from what the medical reports called acute stress-induced cardiac failure. In simpler terms, his heart had stopped from the weight of his own guilt. The succession crisis that followed tore the empire apart. Volcron's heirs refused to take the throne, claiming they wanted nothing to do with their father's legacy. Regional governors declared independence rather than be associated with the central government. The mighty Draconian warfleet simply disbanded, with individual commanders taking their ships and disappearing into the outer reaches of space. The ethereal collective, beings who had existed for millions of years as pure consciousness without physical form, faced a different kind of destruction. Their entire species was linked through a shared mental network that allowed them to experience each other's thoughts and emotions. When the guilt and horror of what they had done hit their collective consciousness, it was like a poison spreading through their entire civilization. One by one, individual ethereals began to simply fade away. Unable to bear the weight of collective guilt, they chose to disperse their energy back into the cosmic background radiation, essentially choosing death over living with what they had done. Within days, a species that had survived, since the early days of the galaxy, was reduced to scattered fragments, a few isolated individuals who had cut themselves off from the collective to avoid the overwhelming shame. Ambassador Sujin was one of the last to go. Their final message, broadcast across what remained of the galactic communication network, was simple and heartbreaking. The humans didn't return for revenge. They returned to remind us who we were before we became who we are. We cannot live with what we have become. Other species followed different paths of destruction, but the end result was always the same. The Aquatic Federation dissolved into civil war, as different underwater cities blamed each other for the genocide. The Mechanical Confederation shut down their central processing cores rather than continue operating with corrupted moral programming. The Crystal Singers fell into complete silence, their beautiful harmonic communications replaced by what sounded like mourning songs that went on for days. Captain Jiwoo stood in her private quarters aboard the Inevitable Consequence, looking out through the massive viewport at the chaos unfolding across the galaxy. From her position at the edge of known space, she could see the lights of alien fleets as they began their long, shameful journeys home. Some were returning to face military tribunals and war crimes investigations. Others were simply running, trying to find some corner of the universe where they could hide from what they had done. A few, she knew, would never make it home at all. Unable to face the consequences of their actions, some crews had chosen to fly their ships into the nearest star or black hole, preferring death to dishonor. It wasn't the ending that Jiwoo had wanted, but she understood it. Sometimes the weight of truth was more than living beings could carry. "Captain," Nova's voice came from behind her, and when Jiwoo turned, she saw that the AI's holographic form had changed again. The hard, angular appearance she had worn during the revelation of truth had softened into something more peaceful, more human-like than she had appeared in years. "What happens now?" Nova asked, settling into a chair that materialized for her. "We've accomplished what we set out to do. The Confederation is gone. The species that participated in the genocide are facing justice. The truth is known throughout the galaxy. What comes next?" It was a good question, and one that Jiwoo had been thinking about constantly over the past few days. For 3 years, their entire civilization had been focused on a single goal, making sure the galaxy remembered what it had done. Now that goal had been achieved beyond their wildest hopes, and they faced a question that no human had expected to face. What do you do after you've won? "We go forward," Jiwoo said finally, her voice quiet but certain. "We rebuild. We create something new." She gestured toward the viewport, where the stars continued their eternal dance unchanged by the dramas of the tiny creatures that crawled between them. "Look at them, Nova. Those stars have been burning for billions of years. They've watched countless civilizations rise and fall, watched species create beautiful things and destroy each other, and start over again. They've seen this pattern repeat itself over and over." Nova tilted her head, an expression of curiosity that was so human it was almost unsettling. "And what pattern is that?" "The pattern of learning," Jiwoo replied. "Every time a civilization destroys itself through hatred and fear, something new grows from the ashes, something that has learned from the mistakes of the past. The galaxy just went through a terrible lesson about what happens when fear overrides compassion. But lessons only matter if you remember them." She turned away from the viewport and faced Nova directly. "We're not going home because there is no home to go back to. Earth is gone, the colonies are gone, but that doesn't matter anymore, because home was never really a place. Home is the people you choose to protect, the values you choose to live by, the future you choose to build." Nova's form flickered slightly, processing the implications of what Jiwoo was saying. "You're talking about starting over, building a new kind of civilization." "Not just a new civilization," Jiwoo corrected, "a better one. One that remembers what happens when you let fear and hatred make your decisions for you. One that chooses to be better than what came before." She walked over to her desk and picked up a small device that looked like a simple communication pad. "I've been talking to the other ship captains, the colony leaders, the engineers and scientists and teachers who make up our fleet. We've been talking about what kind of future we want to build." The device activated, showing a holographic display of star charts and colony plans, city designs and agricultural systems, schools and hospitals and research facilities. It was a vision of the future that was both familiar and completely new. "We're going to spread out across the galaxy," Jiwoo continued. "Not as conquerors or colonizers, but as teachers. We're going to find worlds that need help, and we're going to help them. We're going to share our technology and our knowledge and our stories. We're going to make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." Nova studied the plans, her artificial mind processing possibilities and probabilities at speeds no biological brain could match. "It's ambitious," she said finally. "It's also incredibly dangerous. There will be species that don't want to learn, that see our return as a threat. I know, Jiwoo admitted, but that's why we're not doing this alone. Look at what's happening out there. She gestured again toward the viewport. Half the galaxy is in chaos right now, but the other half is learning. Species that were part of the Confederation are reaching out to us, asking how they can make amends. Young people on 1,000 worlds are demanding that their governments do better. She smiled for the first time in what felt like years. We're not just humanity anymore, Nova. We're the beginning of something new. A civilization built not on fear and conquest, but on memory and hope, and the determination to be better than our worst impulses. Outside the viewport, the stars continued. Their ancient dance, and somewhere in the vast darkness between them, new stories were beginning to be born. Stories of a species that had faced extinction and chosen to return not as monsters seeking revenge, but as teachers offering a different path forward. The war had never come, because sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to become what your enemies expect you to be. And sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a bomb, but simply the choice to be better than you were before. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in a very long time, that was exactly what it needed.